Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Danielle Fisher, and I'm the event manager here at Eco Canada. And today's session is called The Electrifying Future of Medium and Heavy Duty Vehicles, a presentation by Siemens Canada and Eco Canada. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to recognize the traditional Indigenous lands where Eco Canada's office is based in Calgary. At Eco Canada, we're committed to working towards respectful acknowledgement, collaboration, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples across Canada. This starts with acknowledging our honor and privilege to live and work within the Treaty 7 territory. Today, we are presenting from the city of Calgary, home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We would also like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Niitsitapi, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina and Goodstoney, which include Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping guidelines for today's session to ensure that everyone can enjoy and participate in our session effectively. All participants are muted, so please check your audio settings to ensure that you can hear us properly. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the question box and select Eco Canada, the organizer, and I will do all that I can to resolve the issue. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand to you within the next 24 hours. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email with a link to the video. Any questions that you have about the presentation or today's topic can be submitted through the chat box or question box. We will have a dedicated time after the presentation to answer any questions from the audience. And finally, we really want to know what you think about our webinars and how we can keep improving. You'll be sent a short survey after the webinar ends. Please let us know what you think and if you have any comments or suggestions about the webinar. For our agenda today, we're going to start with an introduction to Eco Canada and Siemens Canada, and then we'll be going into decarbonization at a high level, electrification of MHDVs close to home and around the world, charging stations and supporting decarbonization, how to get started and funding programs, and then we'll end with a question and answer. Eco Canada's vision is to build the world's leading environmental workforce. Eco Canada seeks to help environmental workers succeed at each step of their career journey. To do this, Eco Canada has developed programs tailored to individuals at different stages of their career. For those looking to enter the environmental workforce, Eco Canada provides training through the BEAR program and accreditation for environmental programs at post-secondary institutions. Eco Canada also provides opportunities for new workers to break into the environmental sector through wage funding for co-op students and recent post-secondary graduates. For those already employed as environmental workers, Eco Canada provides the environmental professional and environmental professional and training certifications and EPT students. Lastly, Eco Canada provides opportunities for those with vast experience as environmental workers to provide guidance and direction to Eco Canada's products and programs through advisory committees and emeritus memberships. I would like to introduce Ray Little. Ray is the e-mobility specialist at Siemens Canada. Ray has been in the vehicle fleet business for over 30 years and has been assisting fleet operators decarbonize their vehicles for over 15 years. And Ray's claim to fame is that he is bilingual. He speaks in both diesel liters and kilowatts per kilometer. Next, we have Jordan Campis, the business development manager at Siemens Canada. Jordan is a seasoned professional with 7+ years at Siemens, and he excels in technical solution development, product lifestyle development, and project management. We also have our very own Ume Abiha. Abiha is a program coordinator at Eco Canada, and she is currently following her passion as an environmental project manager, leading the Zero Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative funded by NRCan. And last but not least, we have Sarah Balke. Sarah is an e-mobility sales analyst at Siemens Canada and an MBA graduate from the DeGroote School of Business. And Sarah discovered her passion for sustainability early in her career. Over to you, Abiha.
Thank you for the wonderful introductions, Daniel. And hello, everyone. It's good to see you here. My name is Ume Abiha, and I'm leading the Zero Emission Vehicles Awareness Initiative project, which is funded by NRCan. This project is part 2 of our project for medium and heavy duty vehicles. Last year, we had part 1 of this project for passenger vehicles, which we delivered successfully. The objective of this program is to inform, educate, and provide resources to raise awareness and provide knowledge to various communities such as the rural, remote, farming, and indigenous communities, and also small businesses and transportation organizations. Through this project, we aim to initiate a dialogue and help these communities to transition and build their confidence in zero-emission vehicles, specifically medium and heavy-duty vehicles. How we aim to make this project a success is through webinars such as this one, and in-person awareness sessions, and through interactive demos and physical demos, and also web-based toolkits and knowledge testing surveys. And we're also working with our BEAR graduates who are part of our BEAR program. They are from different communities, about 250 indigenous communities, and we're going to be training them, recruiting them, and they're going to be ambassadors who will then train about 50 people within their respective communities. If you have any questions on this project, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. And now we'd like to pass it on to Jordan to take it over for Siemens. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Abiha, and thank you for that introduction on what your organization does. It's great to be here today. We really appreciate the opportunity you provided us to be part of this webinar, and look forward to engaging with yourselves in the audience over the next hour here. Well, a little bit of an introduction on Siemens, and we'll try to keep it interesting and brief. We've been proud to have been operating in Canada for over 100 years, with many contributions to our economy and society in that time. We really are a technology company first and foremost, with key focus areas including electrical infrastructure, e-mobility, factory automation equipment, grid software technologies, healthcare, and more. There's a lot there for sure. We were officially incorporated as a company in 1912, but our work in Canada predates that, and one interesting part of that was laying a transatlantic telegraph cable between Europe and Canada as far back as 1874. And we're proud to have that as part of our history. We also have a strong focus on our business to society efforts, and our CEO is definitely very proud of that. And we've donated $4 million to local Canadian communities since 2017. Thanks, Sarah. We're very committed to our presence in Canada, and we have manufacturing locations in Ontario and Quebec, as well as cross-country service teams represented by the green dots in the offices that are related to those dots. And really want to drive home the fact that we are more than just a sales wing here in Canada, and we're very much invested in the Canadian economy. We continue to invest in our teams to ensure satisfaction from all our customers, and we do that by providing them with local support, local being the key word. And we further supplement this with our channel partners who provide us additional warehouse storage and support capacity. This local presence is especially important in the context of e-mobility and EVs and the associated infrastructure required to support them. And we'll talk about that more later on in the presentation. So in terms of sustainability, I think this was an important topic for us to touch upon considering the context of the webinar. We have committed as a company 650 million euros of our own money to achieving a net carbon footprint by 2030. And we've already reduced our own CO2 emissions in our operations by 46% since 2019, and very proud of that. In terms of our manufacturing and office sites, 77% of the power already comes from renewable resources. And some additional local examples I want to touch upon. At our Oakville office, we have a number of EV chargers, 19 in total, which can be used by employees or guests. We have something called a smart flower solar system, which you see in the middle of the screen here. And we continue to reduce energy usage at our Canadian sites through the use of state-of-the-art building controls, sensors, and more. So in terms of our e-mobility team, we have a very strong commitment to the North American market, as you can see from the stats and figures on the screen. In terms of our go-to-market effort, we've already installed over 150,000 charge points on the continent during the last 12 years, and we'll talk about what we mean with the word charging point just in a little bit here. We have manufacturing for both AC and DC chargers. We'll talk about what those are later on as well. as well as a number of facilities producing the electrical equipment needed to support those chargers. And one of those facilities is actually located here in Canada in Drummondville, Quebec. We've strived to further support this manufacturing capability with local R&D teams who maintain existing products and also help us to develop new ones. So Siemens uses the tagline plug to grid, and we think that's where we can really help our clients in Canada. Unlike others in the EV space, we look beyond just the installation of the charger to the entire electrical ecosystem, and we think that's really important regardless of the supplier who you decide to work with. We help with the design and build of your EV system, but we can also look beyond that to the implementation of something we call a microgrid, and Ray may touch upon that a little bit during his section, and that would include things like solar panels and on-site battery storage to help support these EV rollouts. As you've probably gotten the idea by now, we are a large manufacturer of industrial electrical equipment, and of course with that, we can help supply whatever make-ready gear and electrical upgrades your EV installation might require. We have some different software platforms and offerings. We'll talk about that as well. And those help you manage the load at your site, which is key when we consider the constraints we have on our grid here in Canada. And we've talked a bit about service. We're going to continue to talk about it, but that aftermarket service capability to support your deployments is really key. We can also package all of the things on this slide in what we call a managed services agreement. And that can include paying as you go using an operational model called charging as a service. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on as well. We really encourage all of the listeners today to view this slide as a menu of options, and you can selectively choose from those options or alternatively bundle them together. Sarah? Or Ray, sorry.
Hey, thanks, Jordan. Nice presentation on the plug to grid there. Everyone, my name is Ray. And I have tried to build some humor into the slide deck. The problem is that my colleagues who know me will tell you I'm not funny. So if you see an attempt at a joke, could you at least try to laugh? We are taking a little bit of license today, artistic license, with the word digitalization, and we're going to talk about digitalization within my presentation section here. But really what we're doing with this section is setting the stage for the remainder of the presentation that is really focused on the zero emission nature of medium and heavy duty vehicles right now. But you can see the word transformation built into the slide here, and we're not going to read the slides to you. We're going to talk about information relevant to the slide today, but we're going to talk about three different types of transformation today. The first is economic. The second is what kind of transformation is happening on the electricity grid. And then of course, the third transformation will be around this theme of digitalization, and we'll tell you what we mean by that. But we're really relating digitalization to zero emissions today. So because of the online nature of this webinar, we've built in a couple of poll questions for you today in an attempt to engage you in our session. And so is anyone aware of how much emissions are emitted per liter of diesel? And we'd invite you to join the poll here now.
Okay, so the poll is coming in.
Thank you.
Just give it a few seconds here.
Yeah, I really appreciate the engagement. Thanks for making the effort.
Absolutely. Okay, so it looks like we have about 67% think that 2.74 kgs and 20% think that 2.0 kg is the answer for that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Maybe people were doing some Googling as we were asking that question. 2.74 is the right number, and it's a lot. When you think about how many liters we're putting into our own personal vehicles, how many liters we're putting into trucks and so on, there's a lot of carbon being emitted. Next slide, please. Okay, when we talk about digitalization, we understand that it's not happening in a vacuum. We understand that you all are facing these mega trends every day in your own lives in different ways. So just understanding that digitalization is part of a larger transformation that's happening in our society. Next slide, please. And so we're at a time today when the world's temperature is supposed to increase by about 1.5 Celsius in the next 10 to 15 years, and it's led to the Paris Climate Accord, is led to many countries around the world declaring that they're going to reduce emissions with many different target dates. And at the same time, the world's population is increasing from about 7 billion today to about 10 billion in the next decade. And because of these factors, we're leading to a massive increase in consumption of electricity. Next slide, please. And so we're about to enter, in fact, we have entered the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure people are familiar with the first one, the steam engine, the second one, electric drives, increasing our productivity, the third being the computer age, and the fourth industrial revolution that we're entering today is digitalization. And digitalization, the speed of digitalization is increasing, where today we have about 8 billion devices around the world connected to the Internet of Things. And that number is increasing to 54 billion devices connected by the end of the decade. It's generating incredibly massive amounts of data that we as a society are using to increase economic value. And in fact, the OECD, a leading world economic think tank, forecasts $200 trillion will be unlocked in the economy by digitalization over the next decade. Next slide, please. And so it leads us to talking about this transition that's happening on the electricity grid, and I'm going to use this slide to do it. Along the bottom of the slide, what we're trying to illustrate is that today's electricity grid is set up for the electricity to flow in one direction. From the left-hand side of the slide, we're trying to show what I call power factories. These are our hydro dams, our nuclear plants, our natural gas generating stations. There's even some coal-fired electricity generating stations in the United States. But the point is that we have these large production factories of electricity, and they push the electrons out to the consumer, whether that's a business or whether that's your home. The electricity flows in one direction, and we call this centralized generation. And over the next 20 years, Siemens forecasts that electricity consumption is going to increase by about 40%. And importantly, that increase in electricity demand is going to be served by what we call renewable energy sources, things like solar, wind. And so next slide, please. In addition to this renewable energy, the electricity grid is changing from that centralized single flow of electricity to what we call a distributed energy system, or perhaps a decentralized energy system, if you will. And what we're trying to highlight with this slide is that electricity is going to flow in more than one direction in the future. And you can see that we have shown in this slide some of the wind farms that I'm sure you've seen, or perhaps you've seen a solar farm in your travels. And the unique characteristic about these smaller power producing sites is that they're also able to receive electricity. And so next slide, please. It leads Siemens to come up with the term prosumerism. And I'm going to come back to prosumerism in a moment, but essentially Siemens is advocating that we are going to begin the process of crowdsourcing electricity. And so it turns me as a consumer of electricity into simultaneously a producer of electricity. What I mean by that is I have solar panels on the roof of my house. I've got energy stored in the battery of my car in my garage, so that when my neighbor throws one of his massive parties, I have the option to sell him electricity that I produce or give him electricity that I produce. And at this time, the electricity grid is transforming from centralized to distributed. Next slide, please. Again, next slide, please. Thank you. The polling. Again, hopefully I didn't put anybody to sleep so far.
Oh, it looks like 100% are saying false.
All right. That's exciting. We've got an engaged audience. No Google needed for that one. So, right. And we're going to talk about how we approach electrifying. Consistent with my attempt at humor, David Letterman had a monologue, and he would start off in the evening with a list of his top 10. And I can tell you, I've been in the decarbonization business long enough that I've heard hundreds, and these are my top 10. The reason I have this in here is I would invite the audience to consider, what is it that's stopping you from decarbonizing your vehicles or your fleet? Next slide, please. I am going to speak about the graphics on this slide for a moment, but the real point of this slide are the fun facts in bluish green type there. And I will talk about those fun facts, but first for the graphics. In the left-hand side of this slide, what we're trying to illustrate here is that there are a number of different chemistries for lithium-ion batteries. And these chemistries have different applications depending on the vehicle they're paired with. Of course, lithium-ion batteries continue to mature, but essentially, a personal automobile does not use the same lithium-ion battery chemistry as, say, a heavy-duty vehicle. And then the graphic on the right-hand side, we're just simply trying to say that the evolution, the adoption of electric vehicles follows a traditional path of technological adoption, and that's illustrated by this curve. And in the EV business, I would suggest that we're to the left of the early adopters phase. So we've got a long way to go, but we've got a great starting point, and it's illustrated by the fun facts. If we consider the average Canadian driver, we know through a lot of data that the average driver consumes about 15,000 kilometers a year in their personal vehicle. And we look at how much electricity is required to do that, we come up with about 8.3 kilowatt hours of electricity a day to power the average consumer vehicle. And so to put that into context, the average home, single family home, consumes between 8 and 30 kilowatt hours of electricity a day. And so that depends, of course, on how you heat your home, how often you air condition your home, but this is the range and this is the context. So it's not an impossible task. Next slide, please. The heavy duty data is contained there. But to the point that we're making here today, we're talking primarily about medium and heavy duty fleets. The information we share, most of it applies to personal automobiles. And when we talk about heavy duty fleets, we're talking about large transit buses. I'm sure you've all seen them running around the streets. We're talking about things like refuse trucks. And interestingly, in commercial fleets, you can see the contrast in vehicle size on the image on the right-hand side of this slide, where there are first and last mile smaller vehicles, but you can see some Class 8 trucks in the back there. We're primarily talking about larger equipment when we're talking today. Next slide, please. And so highlighting with this slide that we have electrified vehicles around the world in locations where we were told it's impossible to electrify these vehicles. You can see an articulated bus in Oslo, Norway. You can see a 40-foot bus on the street, bottom left, in Montreal. These vehicles have operated in minus 40 degrees with a foot of snow and continue to meet their service. So just articulating that we have, as an electric community, that this happens to all be Siemens equipment, but as an electricity decarbonization community, we are electrifying those hard to do applications. Next slide, please. And so just further highlighting that while mass transit may have been leading the way in terms of heavy duty vehicle electrification, it's happening across all vehicle segments. You might know that national parks are beginning to regulate how much carbon can be expelled in those national parks, and so the RV business is beginning to electrify. My favorite on this slide is the John Deere image in the bottom. This is a massive tractor that happens to be autonomous and zero emissions. Next slide, please. You can continue to see the electrification of vehicles in other industry segments. Fire trucks, Brampton, Vancouver, Toronto, all have zero emission fire trucks in service today. Next slide, please. I really appreciate the audience attention. Thanks for the opportunity to participate at BIHA. Jordan?
Excellent. Thank you, Ray, and thank you for that that excellent context and setting the stage for the next few sections here. So we'll keep going forward. So we thought it would be helpful to examine the various examples of existing charging solutions to provide context in terms of what's available with today's technology and what's upcoming. So we like to do this, and the industry, this is in line with what the industry does. We separate electric vehicles into light and heavy duty segments. And of course, we've already touched on the word medium and heavy duty, and we'll continue to do so. And so with light duty vehicles, this is really focused on personal automotive vehicles, ranging from electric bikes up to F-150 pickup trucks, while medium and heavy duty vehicles are really anything larger than that, and we'll talk more about that on the next slide. When it comes to charging solutions for the light, oh, sorry, Sarah, we still have some content on the previous slide, thanks. When it comes to charging solutions for the light duty segment, we have seen a variety of offerings brought to market over the years, and all in various states of technological maturity. So these solutions include things like battery swapping, as you see on the top left. Wireless charging is shown in the middle. You can see the little wireless conductor pad in the car there, as well as what has become the most mature form of electric refueling, plug-in chargers. Plug-in EV chargers can range from small devices like what we see connected to the light post in the bottom right, and that's an innovative solution implemented over in Europe, where we're actually pulling power off the light post and using it to charge the cars right on the street. Of course, most people don't have big driveways like we do here in Canada. And we also talk about larger chargers, level 3 chargers, like the device on the bottom left, which can be the size of a refrigerator, even larger. And so with a level 2 charger, we're looking at a charge time of, say, several hours to up to 8 hours overnight. This is what we would also install in our garage for our Tesla. And then with the level 3 chargers, like what we see at that Petro-Canada station there, we're looking at refueling EVs in about 20 to 30 minutes. And based on industry momentum and overall technological maturity, in our view, plug-in charging is the technology which the industry is primarily consolidating around, with the caveat that advancements in wireless are proving to be interesting as well and may gain further popularity in the future. And in terms of the current rollout across Canada, there are thousands of level 2 and level 3 chargers installed across the country already, and there's online maps posted by Enercan showing where these chargers are and what power level they have. So welcome you to go check that map out as well. Sarah? Thank you. So then we've talked about light duty. Now we talk about what we call the medium and heavy duty vehicle segment. And we generally classify this vehicle as any vehicle larger than a pickup truck. And in this space, we've also seen a variety of solutions being implemented from a charging perspective, ranging from those plug-in chargers we've already talked about, which are similar to the ones shown on the last slide, to charging with what we call a pantograph system. And you see that here in the middle of the screen with the gray structure and the device coming down from it. And this has been used for high power charging in mass transit and potentially could be adopted in other vehicle segments as well. Another interesting set of technology solutions that we've seen industry investing in is overhead catenary rail solutions. And that's for things like Class 8 trucks on highways like what you see in the top left, and mining trucks like what you see on the top right. And there's a few advantages with these rail systems. So first of all, they enable the use of a smaller battery on the vehicle. They provide constant and consistent power to the vehicle, and that also helps to mitigate those peaks we see with the super high power fast chargers. Now, there's other ways to mitigate those power peaks, and that is through the use of software and microgrids. We probably won't have time to dive fully into that today, but there's ways to flatten out those power peaks with existing technology. So we also see government and private consortiums working together to implement large numbers of heavy-duty plug-in chargers. Sarah, we can stay on the last slide for a minute. And we see those being implemented along highway systems in order to allow these heavier vehicles to complete even their longest routes. And you see the map there showing where these chargers are planned to get installed on the West Coast. And there's discussions here in Canada, but maybe not quite as mature. And then we also see that, you know, new technologies are being developed with new types of plugs and new types of chargers to make that even faster and to reduce that downtime for charging. And we know that's a concern, but the big takeaway is that there's many vehicles on the market today. There's many operating scenarios that can be electrified with today's technology. And I would give you examples such as Canada Post, such as Purolator, such as the operations within our coastal ports where we're moving goods around the yard. These are all things we can electrify today with existing technology and, you know, really no new R&D or innovation needed to make that happen. Sarah? So it's worth noting there's a multitude of frameworks which various levels in government have put in place in order to continue the transition, encourage the transition to emissions-free vehicles. And this includes policies and targets surrounding GHG reductions, pricing mechanisms for carbon, as well as the opportunity to collect carbon credits, which actually allows you to get money for your business, along with rules around electric vehicle availability and more. We've even seen some governments like in BC and Quebec actually implement their own charging networks, and examples of that are the Clean BC program and the Circuit Electric program. And so we're seeing various levels of investment and interaction to make transitioning to an EV easier. And then it's worth mentioning as well that a lot of the policies implemented in California are looked at as a model for other parts of North America. You know, California is really regarded as a market leader when it comes to decarbonization, and the effectiveness of those policies can be seen with their leading EV adoption rates in their state. Thanks, Sarah. So to be a little bit more specific, there's a number of different funding programs available from a variety of government levels, and they support the purchase of EVs, the chargers, as well as the install and associated infrastructure required to support those chargers. And in many cases, it's possible to receive funding for 50% or more of your project. And when you combine that with the operational fuel savings of electricity versus diesel, the business model for the adoption of EVs starts to become quite as appealing as well, of course, in addition to contributing to that overall decarbonization effort. And it's worth noting that Siemens, in addition to other industry players, are also starting to offer what we call charging as a service. And this allows you as a fleet operator to really defer all of your capital costs and roll them up in operational payments over a specified time period. And often that works better with a fleet owner's business model than spending a lot of money upfront. We have a poll question, and the question is, what percentage of the world's top companies have made a public commitment they are or will be by 2030 carbon neutral?
Okay, we have about 50% of the people have voted. We'll give it a few more seconds here.
Excellent.
Okay, so it looks like about 53% are saying 23%, 20% are saying 36%, and 20% are saying 18%.
Okay, excellent. So maybe we didn't have everyone Googling on this one, which is cool. The answer is 23%. 23% of the world's top companies have made public commitments to being carbon neutral, and that includes Siemens. And we really feel that this momentum is great to see. It bodes well for the decarbonization movement, because without proper collaboration between private industry and with the public sector as well, we're not going to hit our climate goals. And so we hope to see that number continue to increase. Again, Siemens is very proud to be part of that 23%. Sarah? And I just want to mention, as I start to close out my section, that there's a lot of other nonprofit and even for-profit organizations who are working hard to grow the decarbonization movement in North America, specifically focused on that transportation piece. And these groups play a key role in providing education, awareness, and supporting various types of pilot projects, as well as studies in the space. We have several Canadian entities you can see at the top of the screen here who are playing a leading role. And there's several large American organizations that are worth mentioning with whom many Canadian industry players and government representatives are also collaborating with on a regular basis. And most of these organizations also put on trade shows, and I would encourage the audience to attend one or two of these trade shows. It's an opportunity to see what's developing in the space, what the latest and greatest is, and to get more ideas on the best way to decarbonize your fleet. So again, as I start to wrap up, I wanted to briefly touch upon the solutions which Siemens offers to support decarbonization of transportation in Canada. And we start with the hardware perspective. So we really offer a full lineup of chargers, all the way from those level 2 AC chargers we talked about that go in your garage and take 8 hours to charge a vehicle, all the way over to the far right side with these DC fast chargers that are able to refuel even the largest vehicles within half an hour to 2 hours at the most. And so really offering that full portfolio. And I would say, it really depends on your operational requirements in terms of what piece of hardware you need to select. And so happy to have that discussion and help guide you on right sizing the solution for your needs. Hardware is one piece of it. Software is just as important. And Siemens offers a comprehensive set of software options to support your chargers and vehicles. We show a few different modules here, and they range from basic monitoring and notifications and simple load management to more advanced load management options where we're integrating energy pricing from the grid and that type of thing. And then even looking at integrating with vehicle telematics and facilitating credit card payments and RFID authentication. And so we strongly encourage anyone looking to purchase EVs to closely consider, what do you need for software to make sure that you have a successful rollout. All right, and I want to reiterate one last time before I pass over to Sarah, the importance of local service agreements. I cannot emphasize this enough. We've seen different rollouts and we've heard things in the news about, charging equipment not being reliable. And frankly, it's starting to affect the industry and the population's confidence in the transition to EVs. And the Siemens perspective is that service agreements are absolutely critical to ensuring reliability. And there is a cost to those things. And we really encourage clients as part of their RFPs, as part of their discussions with industry, to budget in to have service agreements in place for their equipment. And so just ask you to consider that. And, as you talk to various players in the space, asking them the hard questions about, what service do you have in place and how can you really support me locally? And so happy to have that discussion with anyone offline as well. All right, and so you will no longer have to hear my voice, and I will hand over to Sarah to close us out. Sarah?
Thanks, Jordan. So our final topic is how to get started and funding programs that are available to you. And to start off, I want to discuss the Holy Trinity, which represents a powerful synergy between electricity, vehicles, and digitalization. So first we have electricity, which takes the center stage as the clean and adaptable energy source of the future. Next, we have vehicles, vehicles themselves undergo a transformation. So the emergence of electric vehicles promises cleaner mobility with reduced emissions and higher energy efficiency. But this transition requires supportive infrastructure like charging stations and smart grids, which are vital for widespread adoption and seamless integration into our transportation systems. And then finally, we have digitalization, which empowers this transformation by infusing digital technologies and data-driven solutions into our transportation and energy sectors. So imagine real-time monitoring of electric vehicle charging or predictive analytics guiding energy usage. This means smarter energy management, optimized vehicle fleets, and enhanced efficiency. And so now we want to test your knowledge a little bit. And so we have a poll question here. True or false, load management for EVs compromises convenience and flexibility for drivers?
Okay, so we have about 25% of people have voted. Give it a few seconds. Okay, so it looks like about 73% have said false and 27% have said true.
Okay, so if you answered false, you are correct. So some may believe that implementing load management measures restricts drivers' ability to charge their EVs when needed, and which leads to then inconvenience. But modern load management solutions prioritize user convenience by offering flexible charging options, real-time monitoring, and smart charging capabilities that ensure EVs are charged when needed while minimizing grid impact. And so now to explain how you can get started, I'd like to briefly set the stage in terms of where we started out when it comes to charging solutions. So when electric buses were first implemented, we saw that they typically had small batteries, and these batteries required range extension through high power en route pantograph stations, which would provide a short and fast charge on the street. We also saw that there was always a one-to-one relationship between the bus and charger, so sequential charging wasn't really considered in the standards. We also noticed a trend where there were distinct product lines for plug-in and pantograph chargers, often manufactured by separate companies. And these chargers were frequently tailored for specific projects rather than being part of a more standardized and integrated solution. And we at Siemens are also able to create digital scenarios. So when it comes to energy and load management, we like to look at it from this perspective to illustrate what the priorities are. So if you can see to the left of the slide, there is a circle. And in the center of the circle, we have the vehicle schedule, which is what everything else has to operate around. Because if we don't get your vehicles out on time, the rest really doesn't matter. And then next, we want to look at what we call limits of the possible. And this really relates to the technological capabilities of the vehicles and chargers you have at your site, including things like battery capacity, maximum power capability, requirements for battery balancing, charging type, efficiency, and much more. After that, we look at what we call the limits of the logical, including your cost of energy and the availability of the current grid supply, as well as potential distributed energy resources. Finally, we want to emphasize that we're well aware that vehicle schedules are always changing and that we need to adjust to changes in arrival times and vehicle states of charge. So overall, some of the important lessons Siemens has learned in this market space include planning for your infrastructure upgrades well ahead of time, understanding the importance of interoperability between vehicles and chargers, as well as optimizing electric bus depots as an entire energy asset. Now, as mentioned earlier by Jordan, Canada has several policies in place in relation to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Canada has set a target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And as part of the Climate Action Plan, all provinces have completed comprehensive climate action plans with detailed steps that they can take to reduce their contribution to climate change and to prepare for the impacts of a changing climate. And part of this is electrification of vehicles, including medium and heavy duty vehicles. So as we draw our webinar to a close, it's essential to highlight that there are funding programs available to help you navigate the transition to electric vehicles. You have already heard of the Zero Emission Vehicles Awareness Initiative earlier in this webinar, but there are also many other opportunities available. So as an example, Stream 1 of the Green Fight program offers grant funding of up to $250,000 per applicant, targeting third-party fleet energy assessments along with truck and trailer equipment retrofits. So with Natural Resources Canada curating a list of approved retrofit devices, businesses can confidently pursue retrofit projects knowing that a percentage of the costs are eligible for grant support. This program operates on a continuous intake basis, ensuring that eligible applicants are served on a first-come, first-served basis, while allowing you to embark on your journey towards sustainable transportation solutions. So in closing, let's not underestimate the impact of such initiatives in driving forward the EV revolution and shaping a greener, more sustainable future. I encourage you all to explore these programs online, assess your eligibility, and take advantage of these funding opportunities. After all, the future of sustainability really lays in our hands. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you so much for your engagement. We will now take any questions you may have.
Okay, so we do have a few questions. The first question being, what key trends do you anticipate shaping the electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles in the coming years? And how can organizations position themselves to capitalize on these trends?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one. I would say the biggest trend we're seeing, and it's evidenced in BC right now, where British Columbia has essentially adopted what are the CARB requirements for medium and heavy duty vehicles. CARB is the California Air Resources Board, and essentially they've mandated a minimum the minimum quantity of vehicles sold by 2030 must be zero emissions. And so as we see these mandates roll out, we're going to see a couple of things. First of all, the prevalence of more zero emission vehicles. We're also going to see some fleet operators keeping their ICE vehicles longer. And so as we begin to see these requirements hit, it's important for us to continue educating the fleet base and continue helping them through webinars like this, through funding programs, to teach these folks how to convert from ICE to EV.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I can maybe add just from a technological perspective, I think there will continue to be innovation. You know, there's going to be things like wireless that are looked at, higher power outputs, that type of thing. But maybe I'm too optimistic in saying this, but I think industry and government bodies will figure out this reliability piece. I think we're getting over the initial curve, you know, the pilot projects and learning. And so we're probably a few years behind Europe in that sense. And where Europe really is at this point is, you know, hammering out that reliability piece, whether it's with service, whether it's with software. So
very interesting.
I'd also like to add a point with respect to the innovation that they've mentioned. We also have hydrogen electric fuel cells which are coming in, which essentially, like in buses, for example, in Quebec and even in Edmonton with city of Edmonton, they've experimented with hydrogen electric fuel cells where they've replaced the battery with hydrogen. So instead of the bus drivers having to recharge their vehicles, they just have to go in and fill it in with hydrogen gas. So that would reduce the impact on the grid as well.
It's amazing. Now we have a kind of a big question on regulations. So how do you see the regulatory landscape influencing the adoption of electric propulsion systems? And what strategies is Siemens employing to navigate and or leverage these regulations?
Yeah, not sure if that's a competitor asking that question or not, but I would say two things from a regulatory perspective. First, fleet operators as well as manufacturers of zero emission equipment, whether that's a vehicle or electric infrastructure, continue to need funding support in order to take the risk of converting from ICE to zero emissions. So I would say the funding landscape, the regulatory landscape is relatively attractive for that flip. But on the electricity side of the business is where I would say we need the most help. And earlier in the presentation today, we talked about this idea of a centralized electricity grid versus a distributor or decentralized this electricity grid. And at the moment, there's no legislation supporting what we call V2G or V2H, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. This concept of me sharing my electricity with my neighbor, I'm not allowed to do at the moment because regulations don't permit me to do so. And so this idea of crowdsourcing electricity through what we call distributed energy assets like microgrids, a car could be, an EV could be part of that microgrid. Regulations don't exist today to support that. And so I think we could help our utilities by enabling them, by equipping them with ways to capitalize on this energy sharing concept. Jordan, do you have anything to add? Abiha, Sarah?
And sorry for the moderator, I just missed the very beginning of that question. I don't know if you could just repeat it briefly.
Sure, just one moment here.
Thanks. Yeah.
How do you see the regulatory landscape influencing the adoption of electric propulsion systems, and what strategies is Siemens employing to navigate and or leverage these regulations? My apologies.
Yeah. Okay, no, that makes sense. And I think everything Ray made sense. I think, you know, bang on with the funding. And, you know, the bottom line is that the capital expenditures for EVs are more than the status quo. And, you know, hydrogen is even that much more than EVs. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of funding needed to make this happen. And so government will have to continue to participate in that process. And I do believe we'll get to a point where that won't be needed. I don't think we're there yet today in 2024.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Nick Brown. Nick is asking, is marine electrification seeing similar adoption rates to land-based fleets?
Yeah, I can take that one maybe. So I would say that there's a lot of positive momentum there. I know BC, you know, Vancouver, the ferries to the island, they've just made some announcements. And, you know, it ranges from hybrid electric to looking at full battery electric. I think we'll see hybrid be popular there for a while. And I think we all are a believer that, you know, whatever solutions help with decarbonization are good. And so, you know, they'll have a large battery, but then they'll still have a backup diesel system in the case they run out of electric power. And we've just heard similar announcements from Halifax Transit. I think it was 2 days ago, there were some news stories. And so again, you know, I would say those are the two cities that have the most ferries in Canada, and both are pretty serious about moving forward to, you know, a decarbonized fuel system.
Yeah, and not to leave Ontario out, there's an electric ferry to Wolf Island down in the Thousand Islands area. I would add that we have Siemens colleagues around the world also electrifying, but I would add one wrinkle to the marine application where there's a lot of technological development around shore power. This idea where cruise ships are docking, they're using shore power, and so the ability to decarbonize those sectors as well.
Very interesting. Now we have a question from Denise, and Denise is asking, what role do you see emerging technologies such as blockchain or AI playing in facilitating crowdsourced electricity solutions for EVs charging networks?
Hey, thanks for that question. I would say that the software ecosystem that's needed to facilitate crowd sharing of electricity actually exists already. I'm not sure that we need blockchain to facilitate this kind of technology, but technological innovation may unlock gains that I don't already see. This concept of my car connecting to an information network already exists today. My car tells me when I need my oil change, tells me when I need to charge my car. Where it can advance and where the software can be developed today, we could We could have the software tell me when I need to stop to charge my car to reach my destination, and when is the charger available. Help me make a reservation for that charger half an hour in advance of me arriving at that vehicle charger. So I think the technology exists today. It's about unlocking the regulations between the sharing of electricity.
Just to add to what Reyes mentioned, I was recently at a conference where I saw Nova Bus, which is based out of Quebec. They built a dashboard and essentially like an entire tool which the bus driver could look at live while driving his bus. He would get live metrics, live data of, let's say, what electricity has been used, how much more is left, and just other metrics which would support him to drive better. A drawback there was that when the bus drivers tested it, they actually didn't want to look at those metrics. They just wanted to focus on driving the bus, and they felt that dashboard was distracting. So as much as we're trying to leverage technology to do this better, it is just, it's going to be a phase of experimentation to bring the best out of it.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Bray said. I think, to be honest, technological innovations within private industry are probably quite far ahead of the regulations needed from government bodies to support it, especially in Canada, where largely we have publicly owned utilities. And so, the regulations around sharing power between different addresses even is something that, has not been sorted out by the IESO. And so would continue, continue to encourage all the listeners in the audience to, work with our government bodies to speed up these regulations.
Mm-hmm. And then we have one last question. With Canada's vast geography and diverse climate conditions, how does Siemens address concerns such as range anxiety and cold weather performance and its EV technology offerings?
You want to take that one, Ray? Or?
Sure, yeah, Jordan, you're a little more technical than me.
Yeah, I see a few things. So, I mean, yeah, it's a big question. I think the biggest thing is to try things out. Try a pilot project, run that vehicle on the routes. Most reports we hear back from fleet operators is that the operation was better than they expected, and the vehicle's coming back with more battery stated charge than they expected. Obviously, the more dense and wider spread the charging network becomes, the more we mitigate that range anxiety. And, obviously realizing and acknowledging that in cold weather, range is reduced. And so I think that charging network, along with further battery and vehicle innovations, will address these concerns.
Yeah, and I would just build on what Jordan's saying with three respects. The first is that on one of my first slides, we saw that the average Canadian driver travels about 15,000 kilometers in a single year. So for 95% of all driving activity, it's a relatively short range. And we still are finalizing exactly how to deliver electricity when I drive across Canada. And it has been done and it can be done. And there's charging stations out there that do that. I have to stop for 20 minutes every 4 hours roughly to get enough battery to go another 4 hours. So megawatt charging is coming. That will speed up the cycle. I would say the second thing is that manufacturers are beginning to design equipment for -40 applications, and understanding that Canada and some of the northern climate countries like Norway have a smaller population base. So a lot of the engineering crowd in the zero emissions business don't necessarily have -40 at top of mind. But what's happened is these northern Nordic countries, Canada included, are being the early adopters of zero emissions because we have firsthand knowledge of what climate change is doing. And so because we're the early adopters and because the engineers haven't necessarily designed for -40, there's a catch up. Yeah. So, and finally, I would also say, and an old guy taught me this, I realize my age now, but he said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, Ray. And the point here is that transit authorities in northern communities, northern provinces, as well as the northern states that touch the border, are utilizing fuel-fired heat on electric buses. What does that mean? TTC did a study. They're able to double the range of their transit bus if they operate fuel-fired heat and still reduce carbon by 99%. To me, that's a win. And so we can gain range in intelligent ways that still reduce carbon.
I'd just like to add to what Jordan and Ray were mentioning with respect to innovation, and also a point on hydrogen fuel cells that I was mentioning earlier. Jordan, you rightly mentioned about the range anxiety, which nearly everyone who's driving an EV has, especially someone who's driving a bus. So with the hydrogen fuel cells, they've noticed that a bus that could go up to a range of 400 kilometers with hydrogen fuel cell, it can go up to 800 kilometers. So that's doubling the range, which is great. But having tested that in the Canadian winter, it's dropping down to 400. So that's something that the engineers are still working on. But nonetheless, for the summer, it's definitely a great improvement.
Amazing. That brings us to the conclusion of our webinar, which I thought was incredibly interesting. And I think that Siemens is doing some wonderful work when it comes to innovation and technology. I'd like to thank our panelists, Ray, Jordan, Sarah, and Abiha for joining us today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, and you can see their contacts on the page in the screen right now. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we all see you in an electrical vehicle soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, Ray, and Jordan, for the fantastic presentation. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.